the Sentinel Mindset.
Thank you, Megan, for the warm introduction. Thank you also for feeding us. Very important. Small note that if you ever invite journalists to cover anything that you're doing, they've run studies on this, that when you feed them, they will report nicer things about you than when you don't. And they even measured what you feed journalists, and even if it's a coffee, they will say nice things about you. So thank you. With that warm introduction, you might be thinking that I'm going to talk about world politics, global conflicts, what President Obama is really like at parties. Instead, I'm going to talk about something that's probably the most important thing in the world: physics. Do we have a physicist in the audience? Okay. There we go. Recovering journalist, so we can talk. And I'm not just going to talk about any physics, I'm going to talk about this guy right here. There's a famous story about Albert Einstein of somewhat dubious origins, but it's important to share it nonetheless. And the story goes that in the 1940s, Albert Einstein was a regular on the campus lecture circuit. You see, he was the world's foremost expert in physics, and not just one kind of physics, in all physics. And by that point in time, he'd already published his general theory of relativity. And it was basically a theory that brought together all of physics into one unified understanding. And because of that, he was the most sought-after speaker in the world. In fact, every week he would go to a new university and he would deliver the same speech talking about the advanced theory of relativity. Now, it just so happened that one day, after coming back from one of those speeches, Einstein's chauffeur, who'd been with him for years, approached Einstein and said, "You know, Dr. Einstein, I've heard you give that speech so many times that I bet you I could give that same speech word for word and do it just as good as you can." Now, one of the things about Albert Einstein was that he had a wicked sense of humor. So he looked at the chauffeur and he said, "It's a bet." So the next time he was invited to speak at a university, before they went, and remember, this is before the internet. This is before YouTube. This is before Masterclass. This is before all of these things. And so many people actually didn't know what Einstein looked like. Now, Einstein knew that, so what he did was, before they went to his next speaking engagement, he asked the chauffeur for the chauffeur's uniform. And Einstein put on the chauffeur's uniform and said, "I'm going to pretend I'm your chauffeur, and you sit in the back of the car, and I will give you my professor's jacket, and I'll scriggle up your hair, and I'll make it look like you're Einstein. And you see if you can give that same speech that I can." So they get in the car. Einstein wears the chauffeur's uniform. He opens up the back door. The chauffeur walks in, sits in the back seat, pretends he's Einstein. They make it to the university, and as they're driving in, they get stopped by security. Security taps on the windshield. Says, "Sir, roll down your windshield." Now, Einstein thinks the jig might be up because he's in the driver's seat. And the security guard looks at the list of events that day and he says, "Where are you going?" Now, Einstein, disguised as the chauffeur, says, "Oh, I have Dr. Einstein in my vehicle, and I'm taking him to go to the main campus lecture hall to give a lecture on the theory of relativity." Security guard looks at the list of invites, looks at the back seat, looks at the list of invites, and he turns to Einstein and he says, "Oh, my apologies, please go through." So far, so good. Einstein has a big smile on his face because he's about to get away with it. They get to the main entrance of the university, and this was one of those grand universities like the University of Toronto or Harvard. It was old and had a big lecture hall, and as they're driving up to the entrance, there's a crowd waiting for them. Einstein parks the car, he comes out, goes to the back, opens up the door, and the driver walks out. And who is there to greet the driver? The president of the university. And the president of the university walks up to the driver and says, "Mr. Einstein, I'm so glad you could make it to speak to our students today." Now Einstein, the real Einstein, who was dressed as the driver, he is just soaking this up. He's like, this is brilliant, this is gonna be amazing. They walk into a filled auditorium, filled with that university's foremost experts in physics. Now Einstein stays at the back of the room where the drivers used to stay, and the chauffeur, who's pretending he's Einstein, walks right down the middle of the room and goes straight to the podium. They introduce him, and for the next 1 hour, the driver gives the most impressive lecture on the theory of relativity that anyone in that room had ever heard. Einstein at the back is smiling because he knows that they're going to get away with it. And at the end of the lecture, the entire audience gives him a standing ovation. And they're clapping and they're cheering and they're so happy. And just as they're about to get away with the world's biggest prank, and the clapping from the audience dies down, Einstein's driver, who's on the stage, hears somebody in the middle of the room. And that person puts up their hand and says, Mr. Einstein, I've driven 3 hours to come and hear your talk. I've been studying your theory of relativity, and I have a question. Oh man, the jig is up. And that student stands up, and he proceeds to deliver the hardest question about the theory of relativity that even Einstein had ever heard in his life. What's the driver going to do? The jig is up. He's going to lose the bet. Well, after patiently listening to the student ask the question, the driver leans forward into the microphone and says, "Young man, that question is so simple, I'm going to have my driver in the back answer it." Sometimes I feel like I'm talking about the most obvious thing in the world when I talk about kindness. It's not physics. It's something that we all know, and it's something that we're all born with. In fact, there have been studies, oh, by the way, that's a photo of what they look like, but there have been studies where they've taken toddlers and they've put them into a room together, and they've had an adult walk into the room and give one toddler candies, but not the other one. And do you know what the toddlers would do when the adult would leave the room? The one that got the candies would share their candies with the one who didn't get it. There have been extensive studies on this, actually. And what this suggests is that we're actually born with kindness somehow ingrained in our DNA. It's only when we become adults and we get busy and we work, we get socialized, we get all this stuff happens where sometimes we forget about that essence of kindness that we were born with. Now, some of you might be wondering, what on earth is this guy talking about kindness? Because I've seen photos and he looks like this. My name is Lila, and I'm a war zone correspondent. I've spent the better part of my life reporting from the front lines of the world's most dangerous conflicts. I've covered every war zone you could think of and several that you probably aren't even aware exist. Shortly after this photo was taken, the Taliban tried to shoot down our Black Hawk helicopter. We survived, but it wasn't the only time in my life where bad people have tried to target me. Over the years, I've been shot at, held at gunpoint, survived explosions, and interviewed more world leaders than I can remember. In fact, during the Q&A, please somebody remind me, and I'm going to tell you what His Holiness the Dalai Lama told me about the secret to happiness. He also showed me where in his robes he fits his cell phone, which is really interesting, and yes, he does have a cell phone. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about how just one act of kindness can change the world. And I don't mean a big act of kindness where somebody buys you a house or a car. I mean the smallest, tiniest act that you do can have repercussions in ways that you can't even imagine sitting here. We all know the scale of the problem right now. A lot of this gathering here is to talk about mental health and ways to strengthen ourselves and ways we can help other people. But the statistics are alarming. Right now in the world, something like 41% of the entire world's population struggles with some aspect of their mental health, whether that's chronic depression, anxiety, clinical depression, or even just stress. And the way to know that is, can you go to bed easily at night? This is a simple litmus test. If you struggle to go to bed easily at night, it means you're struggling with something. It could be physical, it could be mental, but you're struggling with something. Now this in turn leads to 12 billion working days lost every year worldwide, which is a massive figure if you think about it, and the amount that it costs employers is growing by double digits every year. Now globally, this represents a $1.4 trillion cost. And what you see is people have invested a lot in solutions. Everything from what we drink, to how we walk, to the shoes that you wear, to technology-powered mattresses, which are really cool. And they track how you sleep, they track your body temperature. They do everything but wake you up in the morning. I'm gonna ask you guys a question. Everybody here has cell phones. Does anybody have 2 cell phones? Yeah, a few of us. All right, 2 cell phones. We're in the 2 cell phone club. How many hours a day do we spend looking at screens? Just take a guess, just shout it out.
30.
I think we're not that far off from that actually, but any other guesses? 15? 8? So the numbers suggest that we spend something like 10 to 12 hours a day looking at screens. In fact, in something that's never been seen before in modern history, we now look at screens while we're looking at other screens. And the proof of this is, you know, I said I wasn't going to make another joke, but I'm going to talk about the Maple Leafs. The Toronto Maple Leafs, when you watch sports, there's statistics that show people that watch sporting events watch them while they're also looking at their phones. So you watch something on television, but you're also scrolling through Twitter or YouTube, or you're sharing it. So now you're looking at 2 screens at the same time. How many hours or minutes a day do we spend consuming content that's harmful for us? And I'm not including watching the Maple Leafs, although that could be considered harmful because we all know what happens during playoffs. Any guesses? How many minutes or hours a day do we spend consuming things that are bad for us? It's actually 2.5 hours a day. This is where the term doom scrolling comes from. Doom scrolling is this thing where you're exposed to information or videos or content that's bad for you, but you do it anyway. And the problem with doom scrolling is that 94% of all content that comes across your feeds is designed by algorithms, and those algorithms are not healthy for you. So we actually spend 2.5 hours a day consuming content that's harmful for our mental health. And the problem is we can't avoid it. It's inescapable, it's necessary for our jobs, but it's slowly poisoning us. Nobody knows this better, unfortunately, than I do, because for years, I was the one on your news feeds showing you a warped version of reality. And I don't mean it was inaccurate, I don't mean it was fake news, I just mean that I was showing you a version of the world where everything was in crisis, everything was dangerous, there were bad people around every corner. And I spent my life thinking that if I showed people what the world was like, that was my purpose in life. But what's actually happened when you watch the news is that you're no longer seeing reality. You're seeing a warped version of reality where everything is dangerous. And let me ask you this, just with a show of hands, you don't have to say anything. Do you believe that there is more good in the world than bad? It could be 51%, it could be just in general, is there more good in the world than bad? Just quickly raise your hand. I love asking this question because it forces us to think about it. So if there is more good in the world than bad, why do we never see it? If there's more good in the world than bad, why doesn't the news show this? We see when there's a traffic accident, but we never see the story of a neighbor who drives their neighbor to work every day because they can't afford a car. That one act of goodness actually has much bigger consequences than one accident ever will, but we don't see that story. And when I was at CNN, I realized that I had become that person on television that showed you how bad the world is. And I said I could keep doing that, or I could devote the rest of my life to showing people how good the world can be. And it was the scariest decision I'd ever made in my life. I joke with my team, I would rather be in war zones some days than try to build something from scratch, because when you take a risk, especially with what we do, you don't always know where the threats are. Put me in a war zone, I know the bad guys are on that mountain. I know what weapons they have, I know they can hit us, I know they can't hit us, I've got body armor, the Americans are with me, nobody's gonna touch me. But when you take a risk and you do something new, it's terrifying. And when I decided to leave CNN, I didn't know what I wanted to do, I just knew that I wanted to make the world better. If I was an engineer, I'd build something. If I was a lawyer, I'd sue somebody. If I was an athlete, I'd try to get into the Olympics. Closest I ever got was the Scrabble Olympics. And I did take it seriously. All I knew was how to tell stories. And I remember when I left CNN, I was not just broken, I was actually broke. I actually didn't have that much money left, and I didn't know where my next mortgage payment was gonna come from. I just had this burning desire inside me to do something good for the world. And while I was trying to figure out my purpose in life and how do I become happy and struggling with my own mental health, and when you're on television, it changes how you think of yourself. I was on television, I still have the record at CNN. I did 226 live shots in 1 month. I went from an explosion to assassination attempt to another explosion, and I just reported nonstop in 3 different countries. I couldn't walk into a cafe anywhere in the world without people recognizing me. In fact, I remember this. I walked into a cafe in Istanbul because I'd finished my day at work and I just really needed that cinnamon latte. And I ordered it and I'm sitting there and I'm on the screen in the cafe. And I just want my latte. I don't want to think about work. So I'm sitting there drinking the latte, and then within 30 seconds, I knew this was gonna happen. I look around and everybody's staring at me. And then they're doing that thing where they're looking up, and they're talking to them, they're oh my gosh, that's that guy. Oh my God, yeah, you go talk to him. No, you go talk to him. And then I turn around and I'd say, yes, that's me, I'm with CNN, it's my job. Can I have my coffee now? It gives you a sense of self-worth. It's a drug. Success is the biggest drug of all. And when I left CNN, I no longer had that drug, and I went through withdrawal, and man, was it painful. I questioned my self-worth. I questioned my sanity. I questioned if I still had a purpose in life. And when this was happening and I was struggling with these issues internally, I saw this story. This is a story that happened in Vancouver. If anyone's from Vancouver, the SkyTrain is like their version of the TTC. It's just as packed. Probably runs on time a little bit more than the TTC does. But I saw this story. I'm not going to read it out. You can read the headline yourself. But I saw this story, and when I read the story, I got to the bottom paragraph. And the last paragraph in the story said, the young girl was eventually saved by someone on the subway who wrestled the suspect to the ground, threw him off at the next station, held him down until police arrived, and then walked the girl home so she didn't have to feel less safe. And I was like, that was in the last paragraph? Shouldn't that be in the first paragraph? And so the way that every news station was telling the story was, oh, look at this dangerous attack. It happened on a fully crowded subway train, and not a single person intervened, until you learned that, wait a minute, actually, someone did intervene. So I looked at this headline, and it says, man charged with assault following alleged attack. Why wouldn't that headline say, young girl's life saved by someone who risked his life to save a complete stranger? Both headlines are true, but one is far more powerful than the other. So I set about to do what any journalist should do. I dug into the story. And it turns out that the person who saved that young girl was this person right here. Now, if there are any journalists in the audience, you're going to get a kick out of this, but I actually found his name. His name is Jake Taylor. Did you ever try to dig up information on a guy named Jake Taylor? That's like being named Muhammad in Pakistan. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of Jake Taylors in Canada. How the hell are you supposed to find that one Jake Taylor that rescued this young girl, this woman? Well, I was able to find him. It took me a while, but I was able to find him, and I was able to learn about his story. Jake Taylor was from a place called Nelson, British Columbia. It was a small kind of like mining and logging town that had seen better days, and he had a very difficult life growing up. Without getting into details, he blamed his mother for a lot of the things that happened to him as a child, and as soon as he was old enough, he left home and said, I'm out of here, I'm gonna go to Vancouver, and I'm gonna see if I can start a new life for myself. Jake was having trouble paying his bills. He loved playing rugby. Jake was, if you ever seen like these typical rugby guys, they're like massive. He looked just this massive guy, broad shoulders, muscular, must have been like 6'3", 6'4", from a completely different ethnicity, background, race, culture than the girl that was on the train. Jake had every reason, when he saw this assault taking place, Jake had every reason to say, it's not my problem. Many of us, if we saw this happening, would say, that's not my problem either. I'm ashamed to admit, look, I have training in war zones, and even I would be hesitant to intervene. He had every reason to say, that's not my problem, but he didn't. He was the one person on the train that said, hell yeah, that is my problem. And he risked his life to save this young girl. Now don't forget, I just left CNN, I had no money, I had time to kill. And I thought to myself, you know what? That could have been anybody. That could have been my sister, that could have been one of my daughters, it could have been my mother, it could have been anybody. It could have been my boss, whatever. If I saw Jake in person, I'd probably buy him a coffee or a drink. I think that's what most of us would do. If you just saw him in person, you'd give him a high five, shake his hand, be like, let me buy you a drink, man, let me buy you a coffee. Now the cool thing is we have this thing called the internet. And thanks to the internet, it's not just one person that can do something, it's like thousands of people. And so I said, what if we could do something nice for Jake? So I posted online and I said, hey, do you remember that story about that girl that was assaulted? Well, here's the guy that actually risked his life to save her. Does anybody want to do something? Does anybody want to help me? Not a big network, not a company, not a startup, not even a group of friends. Does anybody want to help me say, thank you, Jake? And in those days, hashtags were a big thing, so we called it Thank You Jake. I don't know how, but it spread like wildfire. And I got responses from around the world. And people said, hell yeah, let's do something nice for him. And I thought, if I was gonna buy him coffee, that's what, like $5, $10, depending on your preference. But what if 1,000 people bought him coffee? It could be like $5,000. So we found out where he lived, and I set out to surprise him. We raised a bunch of money from around the world. I remember there was a guy in Saudi Arabia. I know my way around the Middle East, and I'd never heard of this guy's village. And he messages me, he goes, hey, Mohammed, is 500 okay? And I was like, dude, I can't even pay my next mortgage payment, and this guy's just dropping 500. And I said, sure, yeah, it's fine, but like, can I ask you, why are you giving this guy money? And he goes, that girl could have been one of my daughters. And I think when good people do good things, we should recognize them. So within, I think, 48 hours, we raised thousands of dollars. I asked people to give us statements. And I said, if you could give a message to Jake, please send it to me. I compiled all of those messages and I put them in a book. And then I did something that really worked out nicely. I emailed the Vancouver Canucks. Everybody knows who the Vancouver Canucks are, right? You just got to make sure. So I emailed them thinking, and I just said, hey, there's this guy named Jake. He did something really cool. Do you want to help us in saying thank you, Jake? So the next day I get a phone call. It went something like this. Ring, ring, ring. Hi, Mohammed speaking. Hey, Mohammed, this is Trevor Linden from the Vancouver Canucks. I'm the general manager. Holy shit, what? No, it's really me. It's Trevor Linden. I got your email. So for those of you that don't know, Trevor Linden's probably one of the top 50 hockey players of all time. He's a Vancouver legend, and he happened to be the general manager, and he called me back. And he goes, you tell us what you want us to do, and we'll do it, because we love what that kid did. So I had this book of all these nice things that people had to say about Jake, and I arranged to meet him. And I said, hey, Jake, I just want to meet you. He had no idea what we were planning. I flew out to Vancouver, and I met him at a Christmas market. And not only did people write messages for Jake, but they sent in videos. One after another, after another, after another, after another. Every single one of those videos was somebody saying something really beautiful about Jake. Now, Jake has no idea any of this is happening. And I meet him at this Christmas market, and we arranged a little thing where I didn't want to give him the book, so I gave it to like a Santa, and Santa had like this gift, and it was really sweet. And we hand Jake this book. And he opens up the first page. I try to not get emotional when I think about this, but it happens, and I'm really sorry. The first page in that book is a letter from his mom, who he hasn't spoken with. And all it says is, Jake, I need you to know how proud I am of you. Your mother. And, Jake is a big, athletic guy, and he starts tearing up because he knows his mom is still out there and his mom loves him. And just as he gets to the last page, an envelope falls out of the back. And he looks at me, he goes, Mohammed, I think you left this envelope here. And I said, no, that's yours. And in the envelope, he opens it up, and there's 4 tickets to that night's Vancouver Canucks game with a handwritten note from Trevor Linden saying, see you at the game tonight, kid. So Jake couldn't afford these tickets for the life of him. Hell, none of us could afford these tickets for the life of us. And he shows up, and as he's walking in, one of the Canucks staff meets him at the door, brings him in through the VIP. They've got a jersey made in his name, They take him to the jersey shop, he puts on the jersey, and he walks in to the best seats in the house. And as he goes and sits, so he's got 3 of his buddies with him because they gave him 4 tickets. And as he goes to sit down in his seat, that's what he looked like. And guess what he sees? Guess who he sees in the seat next to him? It's the girl that he rescued. Thanks to the Vancouver Canucks, we were able to reunite them. And that's not the best part. The best part is that this was a Saturday night game, hockey night in Canada. Big deal for us. And in the middle of the first intermission, all the lights turn off and a spotlight goes on Jake. And you hear the announcer say, "Ladies and gentlemen, please join the Vancouver Canucks family in welcoming Jake Taylor as our special guest for the evening. The Vancouver Canucks commend Jake for his excellent act of bravery in risking his own safety to save young Noor Fidel, who happens to be sitting next to him." And the entire arena gives him a standing ovation. You know, when Jake did what he did, he didn't expect anything in return. He didn't expect money, he didn't ask for anything. And those are the most deserving people who actually deserve the recognition. And when it came time to actually give him the money, Jake refused. Jake said, "I'm not gonna take this money, I didn't do it for money, like I don't want it." And I said, "No, like, dude, I got all this money, I gotta give it to somebody, because I can't keep it." And he goes, "Okay, well, I actually play for a rugby team that has a lot of young kids, and rugby really saved my life because it gave me discipline, it gave me sports and teamwork, and our equipment's like 15 years old." So he said, "Would you feel comfortable giving it to the rugby club so that we could buy new equipment?" And so we did, and they bought new equipment. And so then, you know, after this happened, I sat back and I said, look at all the goodness that came about from one person's act of kindness. Thousands of people around the world heard about it. Many of them donated money. An entire rugby team got new equipment. An entire arena filled with hockey fans gave this guy a standing ovation on a hockey night in Canada. He helped rescue this young girl who's now still going to university, and all these amazing things. And it all happened because of one person who just did the right thing. And this to me is proof that one act of kindness can change the world. And if you think that changed the world, I'm going to tell you a secret. It didn't just change the world, it changed me. Because at that point in time, I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do with my life. All I ever wanted to be was that correspondent on television. And when that was removed from me, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to build a company or any of those things. I just knew that there was something powerful in sharing kindness. And Jake proved to me that you can actually change the world just by doing one thing. That was the picture, by the way, that they took with Trevor Linden. I couldn't wear a Vancouver Canucks jersey myself. They offered it to me, but I said I can't wear one in Toronto. Like it's just not going to work. But of all the stories I've done, the Emmys that I've been nominated for, all the really interesting things in my life, this is the picture that really makes me the happiest. Because we were able to do something completely unexpected for a stranger who did something unexpected, and it wound up changing my life, and here's how. Jake had no idea what his act of kindness would lead to, and I had no idea what helping him would create in me. Well, shortly after we did this for Jake, I realized, hey, maybe we should try to build a news network that only covers good stories. And instead of that headline saying girl assaulted, our headline will say girl saved. And whenever there's a school shooting, instead of saying school shooting, 20 children injured, we would say school shooting, meet the heroic janitor who saved a classroom full of students. And maybe instead of mentioning the shooter's name, we would have an editorial policy where we will never mention that person's name at all. If they want to be notorious, why would we give it to them? And how much would it dissuade other people if they saw that whenever something like that happened, the shooter never got publicity, the shooter never became famous, but every time we showed the people that fought back? That's a world that I want to live in. And so thanks to Jake, we launched this thing, and we called it Goodable. Goodable because we want good to be kind of like a verb, that anybody can do it. It's not just good, it's goodable, kind of, the cliche thing. But when I left CNN, I was reaching around 200,000 people per month on social media. Now, for non-journalists, that might seem like a lot, but coming out of CNN, that was pretty low. Within a year of sharing only positive stories, I was at 4 million per month. And today, Goodable content appears on screens worldwide about 100 million times every month. I could talk to you about how we built the company. I could talk to you about our mental health strategy. I could talk to you about all the numbers in the world, how we're clinically backed to reduce depression, anxiety, all of that stuff. That stuff is important, but you want to know what keeps me going? It's one number: 11. That's roughly the number of people that have told us they're alive today because of us. And I try to not get emotional about this, but I don't think I've done a lot of good in my life. But when I die, if I meet my Creator and He says, "What did you do with your life?" I'm going to say, well, ask those 11 people. Ask them. Ask them what I did. We grew, by the way, so it's not just me, it's like a whole team. It's not just me sitting around on social media tweeting or whatever. We grew to a team. We hired people, we started making money, and we started helping people, and we started growing our team. And we're not done growing yet. But the reason I bring this up, 100, no, okay, we're in the Empire State Building, all that stuff, but the reason I bring this up is because one person did something good without thinking about it. That one person affected another person who did something good. And that other person wound up hiring a bunch of people that now reach millions of people. Now, I venture to guess that everybody in this room has had someone else do something good for them that led to a cascade effect. The reason all of us are in this room right now is most probably because someone did something good for us at some point in time. They gave us encouragement when we needed it. They gave us a job. They gave us coffee. They helped jumpstart our car in the winter. And all of those things are the sum total of what brought us here today. I'm going to give you a couple of other quick examples that I really love. This young man's name is Sir Darius Brown. Sir is not a title, that's his name. I don't know why his parents named him Sir Darius, but they did. When he was 12 years old, he liked wearing bow ties to school. Now, I think bow ties are kind of stylish, but when you're 12 years old, you're going to get teased. You're going to get teased ruthlessly because you wear bow ties to school. So he got teased, and one day he actually went to a dog shelter because he was looking at adopting a dog. And he was talking to the dog shelter about why they were having such a hard time getting their dogs adopted. So Darius says, "Hey, you know what? I bet you that dog would look really cute in a bow tie." So he puts the dog in a bow tie. The dog gets adopted in less than 24 hours. So Darius goes back the next day. He goes, "Hey, I got another bow tie. You want to put it on one of your dogs again?" And they do, and that dog gets adopted. Darius has now helped hundreds of dogs find their forever families, all by giving them bow ties and the shelter taking a photo of a dog in a bow tie. And apparently that increases the conversion adoption rate by 300%. And so not only are his classmates no longer making fun of him, they know that if they ever did, there's an army of dogs out there who have Darius's back. One more example before we slow down for question and answer. Howard University is a historically black college in metropolitan Washington, D.C. In the 1990s, there were a group of students who were in the dramatic arts program. And those students were offered a prestigious exchange program to Oxford University. But many of the students in that program couldn't afford the tuition for that exchange program to Oxford University. It's really expensive. And so the professor at the time, whose name was Felicia Rashad, if you remember her, she played Claire Huxtable, was it? She was actually their teacher. How cool is that, right? To have like Miss Huxtable as your teacher. So she knew that the students couldn't afford it, and she called up her friend, Denzel Washington. And she said, hey, Denzel, I got a group of like 15 or 20 students. They got it into this exchange program, but they can't afford it. Do you have any friends in Hollywood who want to help cover the costs? So Denzel's like, cover the costs? Yeah, I'll do it. So Denzel Washington paid for the tuition for all of those students to go on this prestigious exchange trip to Oxford University. Nobody knew it at the time, but one of those students was a young man in his late teens by the name of Chadwick Boseman. Chadwick Boseman went on to become Black Panther and star as in the movie 42. He played Jackie Robinson. He passed away of cancer recently, but the mark that he left on Hollywood was tremendous. And a big part of that was because Denzel Washington stepped up and said, you know what, I'm going to do something good, and I'm going to put these people through this program. I bring all of this up because all it takes is one act of kindness to not just change someone else's life, but to change the world. Chadwick Boseman changed the world. You can't watch like the first Black Panther and not see the effect of that movie, or the Jackie Robinson movie. You can't look at Darius Brown and think that at the time a 12-year-old kid didn't change the world. No, he did. How much joy, does anyone own a dog here, by the way? Like, how much joy do they bring to your lives, right? They don't judge you. You're having like the worst day in the world, they're just gonna come snuggle with you. Sure, you gotta take them for walks and stuff, but still, right? Darius Brown changed the world. And I'm gonna end on this note before we open it up for question and answer, if anybody has questions. How can you change the world for good? You don't have to quit your job or go to war zones or do something big. But if you do something small, I promise you it will create a cascade effect where the results of what you did, you may not see them for 5 years or 10 years, but I promise you they exist. And I promise you that by doing just one good thing, you too can change the world. Thank you all for your attention, and thank you for your time.
All right, what's up everybody? Welcome to Sentinel Mindset. And today we have a very, very special guest with us. Now he has been on a podcast before, and if you never heard of the name, Mr. Muhammad Lila, well, let me tell you a little bit about him. He has been a war zone correspondent for CNN and CBC News. He has also worked with City TV. He has worked with ABC News, and the resume is super long. But right now, he's a founder and CEO of a company called Goodable. Well, some of you might be wondering, what is Goodable? Well, let's ask the man himself, Mr. Lila. Welcome to Sentinel Mindset. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
All right. Well, some of our viewers who have never heard of Goodable before, how would you explain to the person?
Wow. In the simplest terms, Goodable is a news platform that only covers good news, but in doing so, we're clinically backed to reduce anxiety and depression by a very large number.
Wow.
And so I like to think of Goodable as the healthy smoothie that you have every day that improves your mental health.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this: what was your reason that you had to go ahead and start this company?
So it all started actually when I was held at gunpoint. So in my career, I've encountered a lot of dangerous situations, and I've been held at gunpoint multiple times. And this situation was particularly dangerous because people were getting shot around us. And so if you know how to do a threat assessment, as some of your Sentinel mindset people will know, is there's different levels of threat. And if somebody is holding you at gunpoint, there's a reason they're holding you and not killing you. It means they don't want to harm you. So on one level, you can actually take some comfort in saying, well, hey, look, if they wanted to shoot us, they would have done it right when they got us, but they aren't, and there's a reason why. But in this particular circumstance in Ukraine, people were getting shot around us. So as you know, that raises the threat level significantly. We were able to negotiate our way out of the dangerous situation. And when I was on the flight home, I kept asking myself, why is it that they only send journalists to cover when bad things happen? And I went back and I looked at every single flight that I'd taken in my life. And it was because of a war, a terror attack, an earthquake, a flood, some political controversy. And I wanted to know why. Like, why is it that they don't send journalists to cover it when good things happen in the world? And I couldn't for the life of me see the answer. And when I started looking at our metrics internally, actually our audience data was showing us that audiences wanted positive stories. Whenever we did positive content, the engagement rates would skyrocket. And I said, well, look, if this is what audiences want and nobody's giving it to them, why don't we just build something that gives them what they want? And why don't we use the power of news instead of causing depression? Why don't we use the power of news to cure depression? And that's what I set out to build.
Well, Mr. Lila, I've been personally following you since you've been on our last podcast, right? That's where I found out about Goodable. I scrolled through all the social media. I went on TikTok, YouTube. I downloaded the app. And personally, I've seen amazing stories. And sometimes, even for myself, when I'm scrolling through your page and I'm hearing all this good story, people doing good things, actually making the difference in the world. And it kind of energizes me in a good way, in a way that when I go to work, I meet my friends, my colleagues, my family. I just want to do good things for them, right? I just want to go in there with that positive attitude, smiling, and it actually makes a huge difference. But my follow-up question is, for different people, there's a different definitions of good and bad. Now, for you, who has started this company, and your logo, do good, right? # do good. How would you describe what is good and what is bad?
So this is a really important question because what's good for me may not be what's good for you. And what's good for you may not be what's good for the crew that's shooting this. It may not be good for Constantine. It may not be good for people at Sentinel. It's very different, right? And so what we found was when things happen in the world, the people on either end of the extreme will never agree. So there's about 10% on either side. They're hard right-wing, hard left-wing, hard this religion, that religion, whatever. They'll never agree. So if something good happens, they'll blame the other side. And it happens on both extremes. But if you remove the 10%, there's something like 80% in the middle that everybody would agree that this is good news. So for example, maybe there's a story of a police officer that instead of giving somebody a ticket because they were playing basketball where they shouldn't be, he joins them and he starts playing basketball with them, right? So most people would say that's a wholesome story. People on either end of the extreme would say, oh, all police officers are bad. And then on the other side, they'd say, oh, how dare they even think about giving a ticket to this kid? Not to say that those opinions don't matter, but 80% of people would look at this and say, actually, that person did a really good thing. And so what we focus on are those areas where most people would agree. It doesn't mean everybody. It means the highest number of people possible would agree that this was a good thing. That's what we try to focus on. And we have tremendous data showing that it works. So we've done stories promoting teachers doing amazing things. I went to bed one night where one of our stories was going viral, and it was people on the left wing saying, oh, beautiful thing, teachers are amazing. I woke up the next morning and Ivanka Trump had retweeted the story.
Wow.
And then it went viral on the right wing side of the political spectrum. And the interesting thing is that both sides were saying the same thing. Both sides were saying, oh, what a beautiful thing that teacher did.
Yeah.
And so what it means is that when you show stories of goodness, it can actually bring people together. Except for those extremes, but those extremes are hopeless and lost anyway. What we want is we want to use good news to bring people together.
Okay. All right. So as you explain your goal right now, like you want to bring people together, I remember watching an old podcast, same with Constantine, that you had. And when you kind of had this idea, kind of like a blueprint that what you want to do, and then you ended up creating this company.
Yeah.
And now that you are doing this, you're reaching out millions of people are watching these stories, and actually you're making that positive impact. Let's just say from 10 to 15 years from now, like where do you see this go?
So you know what's funny is that every time I appear on the Sentinel Mindset podcast, something really good happens to our company as a result. I remember sitting with Constantine, I remember the studio, I remember sitting down, and he just wanted to know. He's like, so what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I just left CNN, I'm doing this stuff. And he's like, I want to do this stuff about Goodable. And at the time, I think we were reaching something like 4 million people per month. And I remember Constantine reached out like a year or two afterwards, and he goes, hey, Mohammed, you want to know something funny? He goes, I was looking at the footage from that interview, and everything that you said would happen wound up happening. And I didn't realize it until he told me.
Wow.
And so he was right.
Yep.
And so where do I see ourselves in 10 or 15 years? Like, that's really hard.
Yep.
I just want to help a billion people. I want to help a billion people live a happier and healthier life. Whatever that means, however we can do it, I just want to help people. And so I don't know like how big the company will be. I don't know if it'll even exist in 10 or 15 years. But I know that we're going to try as hard as we can to help as many people as we can.
You know what, Mr. Lila, I've been following you for a while now, and let me tell you this: like, you have such a nice heart, right?
Thank you.
It's really, really, really amazing. And for also the viewers that are listening to this right now, I really, really encourage all of you. Just go to goodable.co, search about the company. There's an app you can download. You can subscribe. And you can also go to different social media platforms. Just go to TikTok, go to YouTube. There's so many stories that you can look at. And I'm pretty sure that while you're scrolling through that TikTok, there's gonna be that story that you're gonna shed a tear, because it has happened to me. It has happened to me. But it kind of motivates you to just, do something yourself, make that change, be good to others, and maybe help somebody in need. And all these stories inspire you. And this is what Mr. Lila is trying to achieve, to put those good stories out there and then show people that the world is not all bad. There are so many good people, there are so many good things happening. And sometimes we just get so much caught up with the bad news that we forget about those good things. And we need to focus on good things. Well, Mr. Lila, thank you so much sitting with me and just sharing your views. And all I want to say, you're just amazing, and just keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Thank you for joining me in today's podcast. This podcast was created for protectors in the fields of law enforcement, executive protection, security, and anyone looking to level up their mindset. If you are learning from this podcast and you're enjoying it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at The Sentinel Mindset. That's a zero-cost way to support us. In addition, please subscribe to the podcast both on Spotify and Apple. And on both Spotify and Apple, you can leave us up to a 5-star review. If you have questions for me or comments about the podcast, or guests you would like me to consider on the Sentinel Mindset, please post all comments on YouTube. I do read all the comments. Please also check out our sponsors, thearenatoronto.com. The Arena was created to help all those in the fields of law enforcement, security, and all that achieve their fitness goals. I want to thank our producer Matthew Doyle and creative supports Jaslene Singh, who help me with this podcast every week. We value your feedback and are here to support you. Tune into the Sentinel Mindset every week, where we look in the mirror to make real changes and explore what it takes to achieve greatness in your craft.
This podcast is brought to you by Executive Protection Lifestyle Canada. Make sure to drop by next week and don't forget to subscribe.